Hi, I'm Phil Cooke, and today on the podcast, I'm going to be talking to Dawn Nicole Baldwin of a company called Mavericks. She's an expert at strategy, creativity, working with churches and ministry organizations, and coaching individuals and how to be more creative and really determine their direction in their life. Now, there's two books I'd recommend that we're going to be talking about these subjects during the interview. One is my book, One Big Thing, Discovering What You Were Born to Do. I'll tell you, if you struggle with figuring out what your thing is, what God put you on the earth to accomplish, what your calling is, this is the book for you. It's easy to read, but it's a great book to help you figure out what I'm supposed to do with my life. If you struggle with that or know someone who does, get this book for them as a gift. You can go on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever, and get a copy of it, and I think it'll really help change your life or someone else's life. And I'd also recommend my book, Ideas on a Deadline. You've heard about this on my other podcast. The book on creativity, particularly when you're under pressure. So be thinking about those two books throughout the conversation, because we're going to talk about things that really have a lot to do with these two topics. So if you're a person that's ready to break free and open up your life to more creativity, if you're ready to figure out how I make a transition to a more creative life, this is the episode for you. So stay tuned as we interview Dawn Nicole Baldwin. Dawn Baldwin, welcome to the program. I've wanted you on this podcast for a long time. We've worked together for years, and it's great to have you here. So I'm ready to get into some interesting stuff. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Phil. I appreciate it.
Let me say a few things about your greatness here before we get started. Let me do a little intro so everybody knows. For more than 25 years, Dawn Baldwin has been really an idea starter. She's been a strategist, working with churches, ministry organizations, even businesses, helping them really figure out the direction they need to go, what they're great at doing, and how to make that happen. She's all about church growth. She's all about ministry growth. She's all about helping organizations get from where they are to where they want to be. And it's kind of interesting. In 1995, she founded AspireOne, really a strategy firm. We call her a lead strategist because she's so brilliant at that. And I want to talk about that, by the way, Dawn, make a mental note. I want to talk about that during the interview because most people have no clue what strategy really means. And so I want to, you've been doing that for a long time. But you've recently rebranded AspireOne to be a new company called Mavericks. And so we want to talk a little bit about that as well, and the reasons for the rebrand and what you've been doing since and where you're going with that. So I think that's kind of interesting. Let me throw in a couple little oddball facts out there that I think are interesting. Once, many years ago, she led communications for a church of 20,000 members that had more than 100 supporting ministries about it. I think that's really quite remarkable. It's also interesting that, do what?
I said, and live to tell about it.
And live to tell about it. She's also actually credited as the singer on a VeggieTales silly song, High Silk Hat. Although, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, you can't sing a lick. But
no, hey, and not the singer, just a singer.
That's a singer. Okay,
that's a key part right there, not the. Just a.
Well, you are a large
group of people. They tried to bury me and drown me out. Yes.
Well, let me just say, you were part of a 20,000 member church leading communications with 100 supporting ministries, I'll add again. And you went from there to be on the team that launched VeggieTales. So you've got experience from a lot of different perspectives that I think will help a lot of people today. I might throw in one last note that Dawn Baldwin has no sense of direction whatsoever. I've been with her at client meetings, multiple visits to the same client. She'll still get off the elevator and go the wrong direction every single time. I don't know that I've ever met anybody with such a complete lack of sense of direction in my life. So if you ever work with her, understand you're going to help her get to the parking lot. You're going to help her get to the conference room. It's going to be, there's some stuff required of you. That's all.
That is very true. My daughter used to ask me, like, don't you go places you've never been? Like, how does that work? Because I am consistently inconsistent. But the good thing about airports is they've got nice big signs. And then there's these wonderful things on your phone now that can get me turn by turn directions. But yes, I do. I am navigationally challenged, Phil, I believe is the correct technical term. And I have other gifts, knowing where I'm going.
In the age of GPS, I feel much better about your safety because I know at least you'll you'll figure it out somehow. So that's a good
Yes,
thing. That's
this
a
is
good
true.
thing. All right. So here's what I want to do. I've got my cup of coffee. In fact, I've got my Dr. Phil mug. See, I keep in mind, anybody listening or viewing, I was the original Dr. Phil before that dude on TV ever was. So I've got my Dr. Phil mug here and I'm ready to dive in. Now, let me start with this, Dawn. I get a lot of questions from the people who are listen or view the podcast, who read my newsletter every week. A lot of people ask me, Phil, I really feel like I was born creative. I have a creative bent. I really love creativity, but I'm stuck in a job right now, or I feel like I'm too old. I don't know how to make that transition into a creative career. Should I even try at this point? So let's start, Dawn. I want your opinion about people that are struggling with that. I feel I'm creative, but I don't know where to go. I don't know where to start. What do you tell those kind of people?
That's a really good point, because I think a lot of people have misperceptions about what it means to be creative. Like they think, oh, I can't draw, so that must mean I'm not creative. Or, I'm in a role where I'm an accountant, or I'm doing wealth management. I don't do any creative things. I'm not really telling stories. And so even though they may feel like there's this creative drive inside them, they're like, I'm not in a creative profession, so maybe that means I'm not really creative. And creativity really is just finding new ways to solve problems. That's really what creativity is about. And that applies in the business world, the ministry world, the nonprofit world. It's like, what are some new ways of thinking? And it seems like a lot of your listeners really are those kind of entrepreneur sort of visionary types, where they're not afraid to try new things, to do what hasn't been done before, and to experiment. And so my suggestion would be, you know what, you don't have to be in a formal creative role. Like you don't have to be working at a studio in Los Angeles, or be even running a creative team in a church or a ministry, to think about how can we leverage that creativity to solve problems in new ways. And anybody can do that at any time. Just give yourself permission.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I know a lot of business guys. I met a guy that actually started a business creating a little part that fits on oil wells. And he's a billionaire today. And he said, you know what? It was all about creativity. Well, I was not an engineer. He said, I wasn't any expert, but I started talking. I have a lot of friends who are in the oil business, and they were frustrated that there was something always going wrong with their rigs. And there was always something that was not working. And he said, I just started getting creative about it and figuring out, okay, how do we solve that problem? He said, I came up with this idea for this little rig. I actually had to bring on an engineer to help me actually design the thing. But he said it was all about solving problems. And now he's a billionaire in the oil business because he was creative.
Well, and that's just the thing. Oftentimes you don't need to be the solution maker. It's just really identifying what the problem is, thinking of new ways to solve the problem, and then pulling teams of people that have the ability to make that happen really does make a difference. And so I think sometimes people feel like, oh, I don't know how to do that. So they just stop short from where they could be, because they're, just afraid that maybe that means that they shouldn't move forward or they shouldn't explore.
So number one, be creative where you are. Is that essentially what you're saying?
I am. I think that looking to see where you're at, where you're planted, what you have available, and what problems do need to be solved is a great place to start, because everyone knows in our world today, there's plenty of problems to be solved, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so just kind of thinking about like, what can I do right now? It can be small. It doesn't always have to be a big thing necessarily.
Well, I think I love the idea that we need to apply creativity to everything. Biologists can be more creative. Teachers can be more creative. Insurance salesmen can be more creative. So the idea that creativity is for advertising people or Hollywood people or musicians or whatever, or writers, that's not the case at all. Obviously, those people are highly creative and they work it. Now, let me ask you this. How do you grow your creativity? Say, okay, I've accepted that. I'm selling insurance, or I'm a teacher, or I'm a coach. I want to grow my creativity. What do you recommend if I want to embrace this concept and really get better and better at it?
Well, Phil, you of all people know this best as someone who's constantly honing creativity, is that you've got to keep your mind open to new ideas, new opportunities, and don't stay funneled. A lot of times folks will stay focused in just one area, but by reading lots of different books, keeping up to date with lots of things that are happening in our world today, listening to different points of view, listening to different, kind of beliefs and things is really a great way to stay creative, because oftentimes if you're doing the same thing in the same place, your brain is kind of wired to get stuck in a rut. And so, how they always joke about you get your best ideas in the shower. A friend of mine is Mark Batterson, and he used to say like a change of pace and a change of place equals a change of perspective. And that really stuck with me. And that's because our brain is wired to kind of think new things when we jolt it with new ideas. And so if you want to be, kind of honing your creativity and trying, like when I worked at Big Idea, a lot of times what we would do, we were in a mall in some of the earlier days. We were literally in a mall. And so the studio was hidden, where this old Woolworth store used to be. Nobody knew it was there. It's like all these mall people are just walking by every day, didn't realize that that's where it was. And when we were looking for new ideas, we would just leave the studio. We would wander around the mall. We would check out other stores. We would look at packaging. We would look at advertising. We would look at like, what are people buying? What are people doing? How are people just interacting with each other? Yeah. So thinking about kind of how do we really explore and widen your horizons of input helps.
It's funny. I've got a whole chapter in my book, Ideas on a Deadline, on the power of walking. So many people, I mean, Beethoven, Steve Jobs walked for miles every day. It's just remarkable. Albert Einstein was a big walker. So it's interesting that you're right, getting out of the office, most people think it's all in my brain. So if I sit at my desk and beat my head against the wall all day, I'll come up with an idea. But very often it's letting the subconscious do the work. And to do that, you have to break and get out of there and do something different. And I would also add, get out of the echo chamber. So much in today's social media world, we tend to follow people we like or we agree with. And so we're only hearing ideas that we've already approved or we already like. I would encourage you, follow people that you disagree with. Hang out with people you disagree with. It's easier for me in Hollywood than it is for a lot of people I know in different parts of the country, where you may live in a very conservative area, very liberal area, and you just hang out with your friends. But I would encourage you, get the input from the outside world, from people you don't agree with. I think that's a really important thing. And even at work, challenge each other. I know, Dawn, you and I have worked together for about 15 years now. And, we brought you in for some of the biggest client challenges we've faced as a team at Cooke Media Group. And you're constantly throwing ideas at me that I don't like, that are different, but they make sense and they work. So I think arguing, debating, discussing ideas, just get used to that, because I think that's so incredibly important. Go ahead. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, just to tag on with what you were saying, I think a lot of people are afraid of friction. They're afraid of hearing different points of view, or they think that conflict is bad. But that's not true. If you look at some of the most innovative organizations, the most creative storytellers, they want to really think about and dissect the ideas and make sure that it truly is the best. And so they're welcoming feedback, they're welcoming different points of view, because the whole purpose is, how can we do what we're doing better? And so opening up, that friction and listening to different points of view really does, it's that iron sharpens iron, which can help to take your creativity to the next level, for sure.
It's a lot of what happens at an R&D lab. And I know you've been really an advocate of churches having an R&D lab, ministry organizations having an R&D lab. Explain how that would work at a local church or a ministry organization. It's frustrating, because the church is supposed to be the most creative place on the planet, right? I mean, we have the most creative story that's ever been told. We have the most creative God ever. God's an artist. God is creative. You just look around at our world, you can see his fingerprints everywhere. But unfortunately, ministries and churches tend to copy culture. And so instead of being the bold ones that are willing to try new things and to push boundaries and really kind of like think about, how can we do this in a new way, they tend to play it safe. And I think a lot of it is because in our culture today, we don't celebrate risk taking. Like when we see someone try something new,
a lot of ministries tend to tear it apart. It's like, well, is this, theological? Is this biblical? Is this true? Is this, they're so worried about leading people down the wrong path that we're eliminating the ability for people to come to some conclusions on their own or to really think about things in a new way. So I would love to see ministries embrace this mentality. Marketplace companies have it. You've got some of the biggest organizations in the world spending dedicated time to research and development, trying ideas, ideas that fail, ideas that need to be reworked, ideas that need to, maybe be shelved permanently. Like they're not afraid to try. And that's part of their ethos. But ministries tend to shy away from that. And so if we had a boldness, if we gave ourselves permission, if we celebrated new things instead of trying to slam them, I think that it would make a huge difference, in not only helping more people, but in finding new ways to truly lead the charge in being creative,
Yeah. So what would you say to a pastor or a ministry leader on, how to respond to this? If you want to create a creative team in your church or your ministry, that their job is to make mistakes in many ways. They're going to try new things and extend the tent poles and experiment. As a pastor or leader, how should you respond to that? I mean, to those efforts?
That's an interesting thing that a lot of people don't think about, Phil. You impressed me with your questions, and I'm not just blowing smoke. It really is a great question, because a lot of churches say they want to be innovative. They say they want to be creative. They say they want to reach new people in new ways, but then they're not afraid. They're not willing to do new things to reach people in new ways. And so I really think that it starts with culture, and it starts at the top. And so celebrating and creating a culture that it's okay to try things. We're trying to cultivate some artists. We're connecting with artists. We're creating a safe place for people to explore ideas, to try ideas, is really critical. And sometimes pastors and ministry leaders I've seen get too hands-on. They get too controlling because they're afraid of what's going to happen. And so they tend to micromanage, which shuts down creativity and it shuts down ideas. And so instead, leaders should set the direction. This is what we're wanting to accomplish, big picture. And then put some people in a room and let them explore ways to make that happen. Don't shut it down right away. Don't say, oh, we can't do that because, or we've always done it this way because. Creating a culture that celebrates ideas and then stepping back and letting some people do their job, is a great place to start. It doesn't mean you have to implement every crazy idea, but give them permission to try things and to see, like, where are some calculated risks? What are some things we can do?
All right. So you're getting kind of into strategy a little bit, and you're, we call you our lead strategist. You're the lead strategist at Mavericks. Mm-hmm. What does that mean exactly? Most people don't get it. They just think it means thinking or something. When you go into a church and you want to do a strategy session, what does that mean?
A lot of people think the same way about consultants too. It's like that movie Office Space where they had, they brought in the consultants. It's like, what is it that you do here, actually? So it's true. Strategy, I really look at it as taking a step back to map out a quick plan. And with a lot of visionary leaders, they tend to mistake action for traction. And so just because you're moving in a direction doesn't mean you're actually moving forward.
That's interesting.
And with a lot of creative leaders, they get very distracted with like, oh, here's a shiny thing over here. And oh, here's a shiny thing over there. And so they tend to chase after lots of things at the same time without really thinking about, is this the best thing to do? Or is this even a good thing to do?
Let me interrupt you here. This explains why church staff people come to us and tell us they're exhausted all the time. They're overworked. They're killing themselves. They're getting burned out. This is great. I'm sure a lot, if anybody's listening right now who works at a church or ministry, particularly in the creative media communication areas, you could probably identify with this.
And for Christian nonprofits too. And this applies not only to staff, but to the people that you're trying to talk to and that you're trying to reach. So whether they be donors or the congregation or other ministry partners, when an organization is constantly shifting gears all the time, they tend to get whiplash, and so your audience is like, I don't really know what it is that they do, because it's like, flavor of the month mentality. Let's try this, let's try that. And nothing really comes to fruition because the leader gets bored. And so it exhausts your audience, and you lose credibility, believe it or not, because they start to wonder, oh, is this just another one of those crazy ideas that are never going to go anywhere? So it's something to take into consideration. So strategy, even though it feels intangible, which is why a lot of people shy away from it. It's like, I don't want to sit around and do planning. Planning isn't progress. Well, planning actually amplifies your efforts. And so it's not about taking months or years to like craft the perfect mission statement or vision statement or anything like that. Strategy really is stepping back, assessing the situation, like, okay, what's the problem that we need to solve? What are some ideas for the best way that we can solve it? And then mapping out a quick plan of how you're going to get from here to there. So it just makes sure that you're amplifying your efforts. You're heading in the right direction. Because if we're running really fast, but we're running in the wrong direction, we're not making progress. So kind of thinking of strategy as like, taking your finger, putting it up in the air and going, all right, which way is the wind blowing? How can we adapt to this situation? So
now, a lot of situations that you and I have been involved in with churches and ministries, you've been really good at basing a lot of this on what is that church really good at doing, or what is that ministry's strengths, I guess you call it. Tell me a little bit about that, because if the church is terrible at a certain type of ministry or a certain type of thing, why pursue that, even though the pastor may want to? How does strengths, weaknesses, how do those things play into the strategy?
A lot of ministries, and this is for organizations as well. It's not something that just churches are subject to, but I think churches sometimes are more vulnerable because they believe we need to be all things to all people in order to reach everyone, sort of a thing. But what happens is when we do that, we end up not really meaning anything to anyone, and we just turn into white noise. And so churches, I believe that each church, each ministry, each organization really is uniquely wired to make a unique contribution. And when we're trying to do everything that everyone else is doing, we're actually robbing those organizations from, the calling that maybe God has for them. So like, let's say for ministries, they're like, we do a really good job with serving seniors and kind of like empty nesters, but the church down the street has a huge children's ministry. And I just feel like, we don't have a jungle gym and a playground and like all this stuff. So we should build that so we can attract young families. That's attracting young families isn't a bad thing, or wanting to attract young families isn't a bad thing, but it's like lean into your strengths. Don't try to pretend to be something that you're not. Lean into your strengths. This is the same strategy that Olympic athletes take. Their trainers don't try to have them be great at everything. They have them really focus in the things that they do well, and how do they crush it in those areas. So leaning into your strengths gives you something to kind of build upon, and it helps to reinforce authenticity, and you're not going to get burned out because you're leaning into areas that you're good at.
Years ago, I spoke at a conference with John Maxwell, and he told me, he was really big on this at that point. He said, one of my biggest frustrations is leaders are always trying to work on their weaknesses. And John said, I don't tell them to work on their weaknesses, work on your strengths. He said, nobody hires you for your weaknesses. If you're not good at this or you're not good at that, fine. But he said, let's focus. They hire you for your strengths. And I think in the same way, people come to a church because of what the areas it's strong in. And it kind of goes back to that. We get confused about that scripture about reaching the world, the Great Commission. And we think it's our job to all reach the world. But the truth is, Jesus went into towns and villages where he didn't make much of an impact. And he left, and he told the disciples, the apostles at that point, shake the dust off your feet if they're not responding, move on. And I just think if every church could focus on what they're really amazing at doing, we would reach the world instead of trying to be all things to all people, like you say.
It's kind of like the idea of the body is made up of lots of different parts too, right? Like that's part of scripture where it's like, we can't all be the hand, we can't all be the feet, we can't all be the heart, but all together working and playing our own unique roles, we can be one complete body, that helps and is working for the same common goal. So I think with nonprofits, with ministries, with churches, with businesses, it's the same thing. It's like, what is it that you do well, and how do you lean into those strengths? And with the leaders that I've spoken with, when they think about it from that perspective, it's like a weight is just lifted off their shoulders.
Yeah.
They just like, oh, thank you. Because I've been beating myself up about us not doing this well or not doing that well. Lean into your strengths. That's really the key.
And also, it doesn't mean you don't do children's ministry. It doesn't mean you don't do senior outreach, whatever.
Exactly.
Just focus on what you do. You're amazing at, and that's what will really help grow the church. Is that
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So let's go back a little bit. Let's go back to our original conversation. For the people that feel like they're creative, don't know what to do next, how do we go to the next level? Okay. So you're starting to grow, you're getting more confident in your creativity, you're selling insurance, you're coaching, you're doing whatever you do, but they want to really make a transition to a different job. They want to make a transition into a more creative position or role. Maybe they want to make a film. Maybe they want to write a book. Maybe they want to get involved in advertising or marketing or something like that. How do you make those kind of transitions, particularly if you're older? I mean, can you do those when you're 40, when you're 50, even 60? Can you still make those kind of transitions?
I'm sure you can. I think a lot of it has to do with evaluating your sweet spot, and your skills. And is there a way you can dip your toe into the water first? So like if you are working in a completely unrelated field and you decide, what, I want to make a movie. I want to be, I have this film in me that just needs to get out.
Yes.
I've never been in the entertainment industry, at all. Is there a way that you can shadow or kind of get into that world slowly, sort of dip your toes into it? What can you learn about it? How can you kind of look at it as almost an apprenticeship sort of a deal? And so start to surround yourself with those types of things. If you're doing a career change, if you're wanting to make an impact for the kingdom, and really thinking about how can I make a difference? I don't know that you need to change careers to do that necessarily. You can just make a difference right where you are. But careers, you want to be a little more intentional about that and kind of look at it as an on-ramp that you're getting up to speed versus just going from one to another. Wouldn't you agree? I would imagine.
Yeah, I totally agree. One of the odd people never think about is, sounds crazy, but I'm a big believer in if you want to make that transition, start by volunteering.
Yes.
For instance, at church, you want to write a book? Okay, maybe the pastor's working on a book and you could assist him as a volunteer. Mm-hmm. I know a guy who he was a plumber, and he really thought media was the thing he wanted to do with his life. And so he started volunteering on the church media team. He learned to run a camera. He learned to set lights. Today, he's got a freelance production company in the Midwest, all because he started volunteering at a church. And there's so many areas at a church where, you want to be a graphic designer? Great. Volunteer with the graphic design team at church. There's so many ways as a volunteer you could start learning, or maybe it's with a local museum or a nonprofit in your community. Volunteer in that area, start like you say, shadowing a person that does that for a living, and start seeing if that's really what you want to do. I think it's a mistake to change careers abruptly. I think that's a huge mistake. I've seen so many people fail, walk away from a job they've been doing for 20 years or more into something they've never done before. And they didn't have a fallback position. They didn't have a cushion. They didn't have savings. And they pretty much crashed and burned within 6 months to a year because they really weren't ready. I just believe take the time, volunteer, try it out a little bit. My wife and I have always wanted to have a house up at Lake Tahoe. That's our favorite place in the world, really. Donner Lake, which is right next door to Lake Tahoe. But it gets bitter cold up there. And so we've thought, okay, maybe what we do is we go rent a house for a few months in the dead of winter and go up there and live before we actually sell our house in LA and move in lock, stock, and barrel, because I don't want to get up there and figure out, oh, this is miserable in the dead of winter when we're all snowed in. Right. Try it out first. And that's a little bit better way, I think.
Even the guy who was the leader of the band Boston, he was a computer engineer. I think he went to MIT. He was working at some sort of computer engineering company. I don't even remember where it was, but he didn't leave his job. He didn't leave his job. He recorded everything. He wrote everything. Even when they were touring, he was still full-time employed at his like computer engineer Dilbert job or wherever he was at until like they made it big. Like even when they were selling out arenas, he was still working there. And so kind of, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially.
I wrote a blog post a few years ago about a great artist who had a normal job during the day. William Faulkner was a postmaster in Oxford, Mississippi.
Really?
Kurt Vonnegut, the great novelist, was a car salesman his whole career. It's just interesting how many people that we think were great novelists or painters or writers or whatever had a normal job their whole career and did that on the side. So it doesn't mean you have to do whatever your dream is full time. I mean, you know, I've written 10 books and they're really niche books. They're for leaders and pastors and media professionals and people that do what we do. And so I'm not going to be a bestseller. There's no way. So I'm keeping my day job but people that read my books love them. They're crazy about them, but it's a relatively small group. So I understand that. So I'm going to keep my job. So understand, whoever you are out there listening, that if you want to be a recording artist or a novelist or whatever, you don't necessarily have to leave your job to do it. You can start doing that right away. When churches want to get their message out there in a bigger way, what are some of the problems you're seeing? And when you go in and help, when we do these strategy sessions, I'm often amazed at how people have, you know, pastors and ministry leaders have these aha moments they've never thought about before. What is it that they need to be thinking about more?
A lot of it is shifting the perspective. You know, when we first started doing this, you know, the idea of marketing and ministry and branding was kind of a dirty word. You know, it's like, it felt like it was manipulation or like a bait and switch sort of a tactic. And ministries are like, no, you know, that's not what it's all about. That's not what we're about. But if you have a sign in the front of your building, that's marketing. You know, it's helping to connect people with the solution. That's really what marketing is about. But many organizations have thought of it more of a megaphone. It's like, let's talk about, you know, me as an organization and who my brand is and what I'm all about and how this works and why you should be part of, you know, what we do. But what really matters is to flip the lens and look at it from your audience's perspective. Like, why should they care? What do you have to offer them? Especially for churches and ministries. You know, I mean, yes, we all know that people need Jesus. That's ultimately what they need, right? But if you're trying to connect with people who are far from God or who maybe haven't been to church in a really long time or are disillusioned with ministry, that's not what they think they need. So
it never crosses their mind.
Right. They're like, no, exactly. So it's like, well, what do they need? You know, how can we meet them where they're at and help them to take that next step? And so it happens in communications all the time. Probably the biggest offender right now is social media. You know, a lot of churches are like, I know we need social media. We should be doing social media, but they treat it just as a billboard, you know, where they're just blasting announcements. And it's usually the same announcement over and over and over again, you know, on different platforms. And I know one of the things that you guys do really well is with helping churches to think through their social media strategy and like, how do they customize that? So it's more of a two-way conversation. And it's not just a megaphone, but you're really building a conversation in a community because that's what people are connecting with. Churches are about connections and community in addition to helping them to grow their faith, right?
Right. I heard the term, stop using social media to talk about your ministry, start using it to do ministry. That's big difference.
Exactly right. And so even during the pandemic, so many people were like that didn't have online ministries before or weren't streaming their services, all like were forced to, you know, they kind of needed to, they weren't meeting in person anymore. And we've had churches call us and be like, okay, so now that we can meet in person again, do we still need, you know, this online church thing? Like the purpose is just to get them to our church, right? It's like, oh gosh, no, you know, it's a both and, because you can reach people online that are outside of a driving distance of your church. You can still create connections and community and help them to grow their faith. A lot of times that's the first place that they're going to go. Like that's one of the things I love about what you guys do is to help them think through their live stream or to think through how they're packaging themselves online and through video so that they're doing a better job of representing, you know, who they are and what their story is all about. And so when you do that, it really is giving people a taste of what to expect. So if they are within driving distance, then they can come.
Tell me this, after 25 years as AspireOne, you've rebranded to Mavericks. Tell me why, what led to that? Why, what is Mavericks all about? What do you do for people? How do you help them? Give me the update.
Yeah, well, we're really excited about this. And we are doing a lot of the same things, which is helping ministries to reach people more effectively. That's always been at our core. Historically, we've worked with large organizations with more of a global presence. And so they would have us come in for these, larger projects that you're talking about, where we would really help them think through how are they going to take their communications or take their brand or take their growth efforts to the next level. But there's a lot of small to medium-sized ministries out there that, would never hire us for a large project like that. And so what we've done is we're packaging a lot of these best practices into do-it-yourself kits so that they're downloadable resources that they can take through with their team. We're also offering coaching calls and doing kind of like one-day intensives as a way to come alongside them and help give them the tools that they need to either work on it independently or to work on it with their team. So it's really about just trying to increase our impact with ministries by repackaging these best practices that work for larger organizations so it's more accessible for everyone.
And you're also focusing on individuals as well. So it's not even just small churches or ministries, it's individuals that need coaching or help, right?
Yes. There's so many entrepreneurs, or ministry leaders that are wanting to make a difference. And they may have started out with like a grassroots effort. You and I have worked on several individuals that, were not really sure what their focus should be, not really sure what their direction should be, did a lot of different things, but they were ready to go to that next level. And so that's where we will come in and we will help them to clarify their focus, really think about who they're best equipped to serve and how can they go that next level. And so you can do that with either the downloadable resources, or we can still come alongside and help with one-day workshops or deeper intensives if that's something that's helpful for them. But same idea.
Well, we'll put the information in the show notes. In fact, you've created some resources that people listening today can go and download. Is that right?
Yes, we did. And so for your listeners, we had wanted to offer up some of these resources. And so when we think about what it means to make a difference with really where you're at right now, a lot of times folks feel like they have to do it just through a church, or I'm not on staff at a church, or I'm not part of a nonprofit. So how can I really make a difference for the kingdom with where I'm at right now? And so what we have offered up on this page is some free resources so that you can kind of look through these questions, think about what this means for yourself. There's a newsletter that you can subscribe to kind of stretch your ideas and your thinking with what it means to make an impact. Yeah. And then we also have some other options that are just like short one-day sessions to help you think through how can you, if you're looking for some, help along the way, we can actually come and work with you and with your team about, all right, how can we increase our impact in where we are right now?
Great. So, and we'll have the information about how to get those in the show notes. Check them out. Her website, how to get in touch with Dawn and the team at Mavericks. And that's a great thing. And many of these are free resources you can download from the website we'll be giving you in the show notes. And I think that's going to be really helpful to a lot of people. So before we go, however, let me just ask you, Dawn, is there one thing you'd want to leave people with? Is there something that is just a last point about the creative life, about being more creative, about how to amp that up in your life? What would you say to anybody out there that's still thinking about, I feel like I'm a creative person. I want to step out and do something bold. How would you encourage them?
I would encourage them to rethink creativity, and to give themselves some permission to try things. And so for those that feel like they're not in a creative role right now, but have this creativity inside them that they want to unleash, start experimenting. Don't be afraid to fail. And this is really hard, especially for more seasoned professionals that have been really good at something for a long time. Their standards tend to be really high. And so it can be humbling, to try new things and you're sort of learning, right? Yes. But for ministry leaders, people that are in ministry and already are in creative roles, I want to encourage them that the work that they do matters, because oftentimes the creative leaders are not they don't have a front row seat to the impact that they're making. They're behind the scenes. They're the ones that are putting things together or packaging things or managing resources or putting together topics or whatever it may be. They don't actually see the impact that they're having all the time. And it's hard because, Sunday comes with amazing regularity. And so it's easy to get burned out. So knowing that what they do matters, that what they do is seen, even though they may not always feel like it's seen, and it really is making a difference. So just to encourage them that, their work matters more than they probably realize.
That's awesome. Dawn Nicole Baldwin, Mavericks. She's also a big part of our team. We have a great partnership with her and her husband, Keith, and the Mavericks team. And I would just encourage you, go to the show notes, look for the information about what they're doing and how they're doing it and the things you can download. I think it'll really jumpstart your creative career and you're thinking about strategy and how you go from where you are to where you want to be. Thank you, Dawn, for being a part of this conversation.
Thanks, Bill, for having me. I really appreciate it. It was fun.
Dawn is fantastic. As I said before, she's worked with our team at Cooke Media Group for about 15 years. We've been very close, and I just think she's a brilliant mind when it comes to church communication, ministry communication, how to position yourself out there, and how to really put your best foot forward if growth is your goal. If you want to get bigger, if you want to reach more people, if you want to make more of an impact, her advice is actually brilliant. As I said early on, we discussed topics that my two books are about. One big thing, discovering what you were born to do. I'm telling you, if you're struggling with who you are, what I should be doing with my life, what's that one thing I'm amazing at doing, this is the book for you. You can get it wherever books are sold. I'd encourage you to get that. And also my book, Ideas on a Deadline. Be creative under pressure. It's a great book about creativity in general, but particularly when you have to solve a problem quickly. So thanks so much for being a part of this. Share it, rate it, give it to people that you think will benefit who are struggling with their creative life and how to get to the next level of their creativity. And go to the show notes and you can find more about Dawn and what she's doing and what we're doing at Cooke Media Group. And also sign up for my weekly newsletter, philcooke.com. You can go up there in the upper right-hand corner, click on the newsletter. It's a compilation of my 5 top blog posts every week, emailed to your inbox. It's an easy way to get it. It's absolutely free, and it'll really help inspire and motivate you to go to the next level in your creative life. Thanks for tuning in.